welcome to episode 50 of Tahrir Podcast. It is the 20th of May 2025, and my guest today is Laurent Richard and Sandrine Rigaud. Laurent is an Emmy-winning investigative journalist, documentary filmmaker, and the founder of Forbidden Stories, a global network of journalists that continues the work of reporters who are threatened, imprisoned, or killed. He has led international investigations for over 2 decades, covering everything from the arms trade and financial corruption to surveillance and human rights abuses. His work has been recognized with some of the most prestigious awards in journalism, including the George Polk Award, the European Press Prize, the RSF Press Freedom Prize, and the 2024 Emmy for Outstanding Investigative Documentary for the Pegasus Project, produced with PBS Frontline. He was also named European Journalist of the Year at the Prix Europa in 2018. Sandrine is an Emmy-winning investigative journalist, documentary filmmaker, and former editor-in-chief of Forbidden Stories. She has led major cross-border investigations, including the Pegasus Project and the Cartel Project, which brought together dozens of reporters around the world to pursue the stories others tried to bury. She is currently a Nieman Fellow at Harvard University. Her work has earned multiple awards, including the George Polk Award, the Maria Morris Cabot Prize, and the Daphne Caruana Galizia Prize. In 2024, she was also awarded an Emmy for the PBS Frontline documentary on Pegasus. Together, they co-authored the book Pegasus: How a Spy in Your Pocket Threatens the End of Privacy, Dignity, and Democracy, a groundbreaking expose that shook the world of digital surveillance, published by Holt Co. in 2023. In episode 50 of Tahrir Podcast, we dive deep into the Pegasus Project, a sweeping investigation that uncovered how governments around the world used Pegasus spyware developed by the Israeli company NSO Group to target journalists, activists, lawyers, and even heads of state. The book unpacks not only how this military-grade spyware operates, but also how it has been turned against civil society, weaponizing smartphones in the quiet service of authoritarianism. Laurent and Sandrine walk us through how they uncovered this story, the ethical and personal stakes involved, and what it means for privacy, journalism, and democracy in the digital age. From leaked phone numbers to international collaboration and from forensic breakthroughs to state denials, this episode reveals what it takes to confront invisible threats with truth. This episode is supported by the Arab Political Science Network. Welcome to Tahrir Podcast.
Thank you. Thank you for having us.
Thank you very much. Thank you for inviting me, Abdallah.
So let's start at the beginning. So in 2020, a list of 50,000 phone numbers landed in your hands, a list believed to include targets of NSO Group's Pegasus spyware. So what went through your mind when you first saw the data? And what did it take to even begin verifying something of that on that scale?
Yeah. First of all, we were granted access to that list with another organization called Amnesty International Security Lab. And the two of us, Forbidden Stories and Amnesty, so we're granted access to a list of 50,000 phone numbers where at the beginning we didn't know who we were talking about. We were receiving those phone numbers, and it was likely phone numbers who belongs to people who have been potentially surveilled by many states for some years, who were using against those people a spyware called Pegasus. And Pegasus is a very, very offensive, very intrusive, very efficient spyware sold by the Israeli NSO company to many state actors for years. And so my initial reaction was to be initially skeptical, because when you are a journalist, you were always very worried about that kind of data set, that kind of list, that might be a trap, that might be too beautiful to be true. And so I was a bit skeptical. And in the meantime, I was quite soon very afraid and stressed, because basically some of those numbers were numbers of friends of mine and people around me. So I started understanding that maybe there is a lot of people around me who have been surveilled, who are currently surveilled, And we saw as well that political figures such as the president of French Republic and other members of the government were inside that list as well. So first skeptical, then a bit afraid, and then very excited to run a project, an investigative project, because we knew from the beginning that it was a very important stories to reveal and very important to investigate the misuse of spywares while targeting citizens all around the world.
Before we go deeper, can you explain for listeners what exactly is Pegasus? What makes the spyware so different, so invasive, and so powerful as a tool of surveillance?
Yes, Pegasus is a name of a spyware that is extremely powerful, extremely invasive. That is basically a military weapon used against civilians. And officially, it's a spyware used against terrorists, used against the worst, dangerous criminals. But in reality, we discovered that it was used against many dissidents, lawyers, journalists, opponents all around the world. And basically, that's a spyware that once it took the control, once it takes the control of your phone, you're trapped. Because the spyware will activate the camera, the microphone, will be able to read your messages, even your encrypted messages. Basically, the spyware will take the entire control of your device, and you know that your device is full of information about you. And some information you don't want to be landing into some hands, especially about some people who might use those information against you, against your sources, or against anything you are doing.
In the early age of Pegasus, you usually got a link to click on, and that was the vector that would infect your phone. But since 2017, 2018, Pegasus started to be totally invisible. NSO was able to create that technology that was able to infect your phone without you clicking on any link. So once you're targeted and hacked with this spyware, basically your phone is totally surveilled. It's a very invasive weapon for autocratic regime, and in the hands of bad actors, this can be terribly harmful to people who are fighting for democracy, for people who are basically trying to do the good in where they live.
The book shows just how global this was. Journalists in Mexico, lawyers in India, activists in Hungary, and in the Middle East, prominent figures in countries like Saudi Arabia, the UAE, Morocco, Egypt, Lebanon. So how did you start connecting the dots between the phone numbers and the individuals being targeted?
Yeah, that was basically what we did as well, together with Amnesty International Security Lab, with Claudio and Donka, who were the two engineers who were part of that amazing team based in Germany. And they were able to identify the owners of those numbers. And we were able as well to double check in our contact book some of those numbers. And we discovered some friends. And so once we got an idea about the names and the occupations, the positions, and the international scale of what we were talking about, what we were discovering hour after hours, we understood the massive scale of the targeting. And as soon as we understood the massive scale of the targeting, we decided to organize a large worldwide collaboration. So my role at Forbidden Stories is to lead that kind of very complex project where you are teaming up with others in order to run a complex cross-border investigation worldwide. And so this is what we did. We called some partners at the Washington Post, at the Guardian, at Le Monde, in India, everywhere where we were having some friends who were used to team up with Forbidden Stories on some past projects. But the thing that it was very complicated to even to use our device to tell the other ones, tell the people we were calling that we were having information about the spyware. And we didn't want to be infected ourselves, surveil ourselves. So, and the other thing that made the things very complicated, that we were at that time during the COVID period, and there were a lot of limitation for transportation. And so it was kind of difficult to take a plane. So we needed to meet in person our partners. And so we still managed to travel around the world. I was able to pitch the project to some of the partners in some open public space, in some backyard, public garden, and things like that. And as soon as our partners understood as well the scope of what we were talking about, the scale of the targeting, we joined forces, and that was crucial to set up a kind of dream team to investigate the targeting, to question the victims, to make some forensic analysis, and then to report and ask questions and comments to many states that both of them have very bad reputation in terms of human rights track records.
You also brought together a massive coalition of journalists across borders, as you just elaborated on. So what was the biggest challenge in managing such a high-stakes, high-secrecy collaboration? And most importantly, how did you protect your team?
This is a great question, because this was the most difficult thing we had to deal with, working on such an invasive, such a sophisticated spyware, the most sophisticated spyware that was sold at that time, with journalists who are living on different countries, very far. And we were in the middle of the COVID crisis, so it was very difficult for us to meet. So we had to set up communication system that would protect us. It was impossible for us to use our phones. It was impossible for us to use our computers. So we had to be very, very creative. We had first, we needed to buy other devices. We needed to set up a system of communication that wouldn't rely on phone numbers. We couldn't basically use a phone that was a potential target and that could have been hacked with Pegasus. So we haven't communicated on the whole process, because this is still very sensitive. But I can tell you that we had to be very creative. We couldn't have done that without the help of the Amnesty International Security Lab, because they were the tech brains of the investigation. But it required time. We also were working with journalists who didn't have the same level of awareness when it came to, privacy, protection, security of communication. So we had to train everybody. We had to make sure everybody was respecting the protocol. And this was, we had NDA signed, of course. There was a huge security concern. The possibility that this investigation could be exposed at some point was extremely high. Hopefully nothing happened, and we were able to protect the investigation until the end. Nothing leaked before that. But of course, when you're working with 80 journalists in different countries from different outlets, people who have different cultures as well, it's very complicated to make sure everybody is on the same page. But it took us a lot of discussions, a lot of training, but we hopefully did it. And I think this was probably, one of the most challenging international cross-border investigation when it comes to security protocols and security of communications.
You worked closely with Amnesty International Security Lab. So can you talk about what the collaboration looked like and how crucial it was to confirming the technical details?
So we worked with two amazing guys at Amnesty International, Claudio Garnieri and Donka O'Carroll, who are really the best experts of Pegasus, probably with Citizen Lab as well, another lab working on Pegasus. But those were people who had been working on this spyware for years and who were able to see in the phones traces of Pegasus nobody else could see. And so they help us at the beginning of the process to find out who was behind the phone numbers we had and the people, the faces behind the phone numbers. But they also were very helpful after that process, because once we had discovered who had been potentially targeted with Pegasus, we needed evidence. What we had was just a list of phone numbers and some names we had been able to find, but we didn't have much more. And this is not enough to publish a story. I mean, if we don't have the evidence that those people had been effectively targeted by Pegasus, there is no story behind that. So what Amnesty International and what those two brilliant geeks help us to do was to find the traces of Pegasus in the phone. And this was a very, very sensitive process, because you have in your hand the list of people who are threatened, who live in very dangerous country, who are threatened by their own governments. And you have to contact them to let them know that they might be potential targets and to see if they allow you to use their phone and analyze their data to see if they're actually have been hacked. How do you do that without using your phone? I mean, you cannot call somebody and let him know that he's spied on by a government using his phone. You need to find something else. So basically, we were trying to find people that were able to see those targets in person, convince them to come in a room, meet with them with no phones, and that can be very weird. I mean, when you say to somebody, I mean, I have something important to tell you, but please keep your phone outside the room or keep your computer outside the room. There are good reasons that people could be a bit cautious about that. So we really had to think of strategy to approach those people without endangering them more than they were already, and let them know what we believed we had and convince them to give the phone to have them analyzed. But, give your phone, share your phone with somebody you don't know very well is also a very difficult decision to make. So those people really needed to trust us to do that. And the way we worked around that is that we first tried to convince journalists that we were seeing on the list and that we knew, or that we were connected with through somebody else. So people who could trust us, people who could keep a secret and not tweeting that they had been spied on without any verification, and also people that were at some point invited to join the investigation, because those were the people who in their specific countries, either Hungary or India, because the case, could really work on Pegasus with us, could really be in touch with the other victims, and could be smart enough to understand the risks they were taking and protecting themselves. So this is how we built also our collaboration. We worked with journalists from the Washington Post, from The Guardian, from Le Monde, people we were usually partnering with at Forbidden Story, but we also decided to work with journalists from countries where Pegasus was used and potentially people who had been hacked as well. And those journalists, so Hungarian journalists from Direct 36 or the Indian journalists from The Wire, they were part of our investigation. They shared their phone, and we sent those phones to Amnesty International Security Lab. And very quickly, Claudio and Donka told us that they were seeing actually traces of Pegasus in the phone. So this was confirming that our investigation and the list we had was very solid, because the information we had been confirmed technically with the analysis of the phone. And we were, at that point, we knew when we had many dozen or more confirmation that we have something strong in our hand and that we would be able to publish a story.
And you confirmed surveillance of hundreds of journalists, lawyers, activists, and even heads of state, as you just mentioned. Did any of the cases you uncovered shock you more than the others?
Yeah, I was really shocked by the fact that Atice, the widow of Jamal Khashoggi, while she was waiting for Jamal, who was inside the consulate and basically he was just killed after he entered the consulate. She was waiting for him outside, and exactly at that time, exactly at that hour, she had been infected. She had been targeted with that spyware. And so that gives you an idea about for what kind of reasons Saudi Arabia and other states are attacking, infecting, using cyber surveillance and spyware against people, because they want to know what you know about that. They want to control the narrative. They want to prevent you to know too much about the crime of your husband, who was a journalist contributing to the Washington Post. So the targeting of the widow of Jamal Khashoggi, the targeting of Khadija Ismailova, a journalist in Azerbaijan, the targeting of Edoui Plenel, a journalist in France, the targeting of some ministers of the French government, but as well many people in Mexico, activists, lawyers, journalists. Basically, I was shocked by the big picture. The big picture was people who are challenging the powerful are on that list, and they are surveilled for that. And once they got surveilled, they became, entirely trapped. If you get trapped, if you get surveilled of that kind, they will know everything about you, and so that's going to be very risky for you and for your sources and the people you are talking to. And one thing that very strikes me as well, shocked me, was Khadija Ismailova, a journalist in Azerbaijan, who was 10 years before surveilled with CCTV in a flat that the government were hiding to surveil her. And now that time she was surveilled through a spyware. And she said the big difference between the two, that the first was a disaster in terms of trauma for her, of course. But the second one was even more harmful, because she said you became radioactive, because all your friends who call you one day, your lawyers who call you one day, your sources who call you one day, you put all those people in danger. And that's how and why cyber surveillance is extremely dangerous and causing a lot of trouble and harm to many people in the world.
Everything was shocking, to be honest, when we saw the name of Emmanuel Macron in the list, Laurent and I remember very well that moment. We realized how big the story was just because of that name. But in a way, Macron has ways to protect himself. Emmanuel Macron is the president of France. He probably made a mistake not using the very secure phone he's supposed to use. And this is clearly an issue of national security. But the people who were risking their lives were the human rights activists, the journalists who are working in very complicated country, in Azerbaijan, in Morocco, in countries where it's very complicated to be a journalist, it's very complicated to be a human rights activist. And when you try to protect yourself, usually you're using messaging apps like Signal to make your conversation secure with your sources. And suddenly, those people realized, when we told them that they had been spied on with Pegasus, that they had been so vulnerable that potentially their sources were compromised. This is how, this is the title of our book on Pegasus. It's a spy in your phone. I mean, Pegasus is really the spy that follows you everywhere. I mean, you can leave your house, you can change country. If your phone had been infected with Pegasus, you'd be still spied on, even if you took so many precautions. So this was really I think, the most disturbing things we discovered and it's extremely violent. We saw how people were traumatized when we started announcing that they had been potentially hacked. Some of them were crying, others just, needed a few hours to really grasp and process what happened and to go back what they have been exchanging on their phones. So this, I think, the numbers of trauma you create when you tell to people that they had been potentially, or hacked or potentially hacked is huge. And we also had to deal with this in our own company, and in our own organization at Forbidden Stories. We were working with journalists who had to deal with the announcement. I remember very well Claudio Garnieri saying how he had the feeling he was, a doctor working in the Middle Ages, trying to work on plague. What you can do is so small compared to how big the damage is. And this was, of course, very complicated to deal with as journalists. But we needed to have the story right. We needed to do our verification. We needed to be factually very strong in order to publish a story that is, I think, very important story in the ages we live in.
And you reached out to NSO Group and governments implicated in this investigation. So what kind of response or pushback did you get?
Yeah, I remember that day where I was clicking on the email to send that to the NSO Group, a list of more than 50 questions. But all those 50 questions were signed by all the newspapers and journalists on board. So it's like you know that you are signing something big, and maybe the receiver isn't expecting such an email on a morning like that. So I remember sending that and then waiting for 1 hour, 2 hours, 1 day, 2 days. And then I receive an answer, 4 or 5 lines, basically one paragraph of nobody was signing that, of the NSO company saying, oh, what you say is allegation without any kind of evidence, and that's not true, and what we are doing with that spyware, that we are catching the bad guys, and this is all we have to say. And so I was quite surprised by that email. I felt like, okay, that is quite strange that they're not reactive in a very offensive way that we might expect in that kind of global investigation. And basically what happened, so I went to bed, I slept, and then in the morning, very early in the morning, I received many messages from many partners who receive letters from lawyers sent from the NSO Group after them, saying that you are part of that Forbidden Stories project consortium. We know that you are about to publish that. If you dare to publish that, we will sue you for defamation. So we ask you not to publish that. So basically, they were trying to divide us a little bit. They were having a kind of double-face strategy, and still, we managed to go on a conversation with the NSO CEO, but it was off the record, and nothing was really usable for the publication according to the agreement we had with the NSO, and Folkley, they didn't want to be on the record. And we managed to publish, and finally we made it. That was kind of complex, but because we were a collaboration, because we were so many around the world, we were unstoppable.
Since the project came out, there has been a lot of talk, but has anything actually changed? Have you seen any tangible political, legal, or technological responses that give you hope or give hope for the future?
Yes, so there is a kind of 2 columns to make, the positive and things that change. So in that column, positive, change that we got after the publication. Clearly, now the company Apple is notifying every users of iPhone, for instance, when they are suspecting that there is an ongoing state attack against their own clients, customers. There is recently the company NSO has been condemned, sentenced, and they have to pay more than $160 million to the Meta Group because of the hack of the use of NSO against WhatsApp that belongs to the Facebook that is now named Meta. So the NSO Group has been charged. Some big tech companies are suing them. There is one European investigation led by the European Parliament that they were investigating the NSO company and the scale of the targeting, and they made some conclusion that none of the EU state members are following. In the meantime, so some positive things happen, but to be frank, to be very honest, that industry of cyber surveillance is making a lot of money. And if it's not NSO, that's going to be other companies. And we can see that the Saudi Arabia, they went to another company to buy another spyware. As soon as you have autocrats, states who are okay to pay millions of dollars to buy a spyware so they can track their own dissidents, so they can do what they want, whatever they want, without any kind of control and check and balances, industry will always find a solution to sell that kind of spyware. So it's a very lucrative, profitable market, a very resilient industry, a very secretive industry as well. It's hard to know what they are doing, and it's even harder to control them in terms of regulations. And so far, there is no real regulation that is protecting the citizens against that kind of attack.
We also had a very strong reaction of the US government of that time. And actually, the US government blacklisted NSO, which make it very difficult for NSO to have any kind of business with American company. They also decided to ban the use of commercial spywares in the US. So foreign commercial spyware. So these are reasons, I think, or these are very concrete impacts, not to mention all the investigations and commission of inquiries that were created in France, in Europe, or in Belgium. So this has an impact. And as a journalist, it doesn't happen that often to see your work having so much impact. And the biggest impact was also the beginning of a global discussion. Nobody had realized before the Pegasus Project the scale of the misuse of those kinds of spyware. We knew, that this could happen in some countries. There was individual cases in Mexico or in some other countries, but we were revealing the existence of, hundreds and hundreds of targets that shouldn't have been spied on. So it's the first time I think people realized how much companies and governments were not doing the things they were saying they were doing, using those spyware to fight terrorism or to find criminal organization. That's how they sell it. That's how they pitch it. That's how they explain they should go on selling those spywares. The reality is, you probably have some of those legitimate targets in the list of victims, but you also have many people who shouldn't be a legitimate target of Pegasus or of any spyware.
I was actually supposed to interview a former Egyptian presidential candidate or candidate hopeful. His phone was hacked a little bit before our interview. I was just about to phone him. And I remember it was called the Predator software.
Predator, yeah.
Yeah, I know it's European, but I'm not really sure which country made it. And right after, Apple made an update, a phone iOS update, just exclusively to like covering that exploit. Have you heard of Predator?
Yeah, of course. And it's there are different spyware. Currently, is Predator is one of them. And one thing that is very important is to make the updates Apple is asking you to do if you are using some Apple device, is to use as well the lockdown mode as well. That is available on iOS device. So yeah, that's the thing is we always, the trend that we will always know a little bit later about what they were able to get from our device. The money, the big money, the big dollars are on the other side. There, it's on the side of people who are very well paid to find vulnerabilities into our system, into our devices. It's a very lucrative sector.
So, as the founder of Forbidden Stories, this isn't your first high-risk project. So, what was different about Pegasus, and how did it fit into your wider mission of protecting threatened journalism? And could you also tell us more about about Forbidden Stories?
Yeah. So the Pegasus Project, but all the projects we are running with Forbidden Stories are always very dangerous. One person have been killed, and we are pursuing the stories that of that person who have been just killed. And that's our mission of Forbidden Stories. We are pursuing the work of people who have been killed, people who have been jailed, arrested, and so it's always a lot of precautions to take. We have to be very cautious about the device we are using, the way we are operating in the field, the protection of our sources. So from the very beginning, and that's as well my background as an investigative journalist for more than 25 years, I know that nothing is on the digital aspect, nothing is 100% safe. So you need to be always careful and have in mind that what the message you're going to send to someone might be captured by an attacker or by some intelligence forces. So it's always better to meet in person for the more sensitive conversation you would like to have. Forbidden Stories is a global organization where we are operating worldwide, and we are both working. We did the Gaza project recently. The Gaza project was a global collaboration between many journalists, including Palestinian and Israeli journalists, but as well German journalists, American journalists, French journalists. The goal was to investigate the targeting of journalists killed in Gaza by the Israeli army, and to know and to investigate if they were specifically targeted, but as well to pursue their work about how they were trying to document the starvation that is happening in the Gaza Strip, for instance. Recently, we released another project called the Victoria Project, that is about the work of one Ukrainian journalist who died in captivity in Russia, in a prison in Russia. And she wanted to investigate what was happening to 20,000 of civilians who have been arrested, deported, and tortured inside jail in Russia. And she ended up like the other civilians, and she died over there. So our mission was to pursue the work of Victoria. So that's what we do every day, and I'm grateful for all those partners who are always with us from the very beginning. I started Forbidden Stories almost 8 years ago, and it's always every project, every story is a different one. The Pegasus was in some way more technical than the other ones, not more dangerous, to be honest, because the Gaza project, the Victoria project was way more dangerous in terms of risk. Or some stories we did in Central Africa or in South America or in Mexico, where you are surrounded by violence when you are investigating there. So this is why collaboration is a need. Collaboration is bringing you protection. It doesn't make sense to kill one reporter if you know that 49 are here to do the same story. We are unstoppable, but collaboration is bringing resources as well. We are 50 journalists around us, and we can split the work. We can ask some of them to go reporting in that country, another one to map with satellite pictures the environmental crimes that we're investigating, for instance. And collaboration is bringing impact as well. We are publishing at once, at the same time, same hour, same second, all those stories. And then that's a way to get some reaction worldwide and to create a conversation about some of the most important topics we need to address. And one last word, those topics are always the stories that the journalists are killed for are very, very important stories. In many countries, most of the more dangerous topics are always the same. It's about corruption, money laundering, environmental crimes. I know that in Egypt, the situation is very dramatic as well, with the disappearance of a lot of journalists. I know that in Gaza, journalists got targeted. In Colombia, there is a lot of corruption and between politicians and cartels and entrepreneurs as well. So each country is very different, but the global level of threats against press freedom is really high. And because it's very, very high, we need to team up. That's the only way we can survive. And now we are facing a new global axis from the west to the east, from Trump to Putin, where they are really naming, they have a common vision. They think that we, the journalists, we are the enemy of the people. So we are not the enemies of the people. We are the people. We are publishing for the people. And when it's going to be very dangerous and complex, we should team up, because that will offer protection, resources, and impact.
Where do you see this surveillance, basically, industry going from now on, especially that the AI sector has been growing exponentially, and if you now mix both, it makes for really nightmarish products. And there was this Israeli official that was speaking on Fox News actually yesterday or 2 days ago, and he was basically pitching a similar spyware called Gideon, which is not a spyware, it's more of a surveillance program that basically surveils your social media use, everything that you do online, and basically classifies you accordingly. So I'm curious to hear your thoughts on the future, really, on what you think it would look like, and also how it could potentially be stopped, or at least slowed down, because really from everything that's been happening recently, it doesn't look like this is going to stop, or if it's even possible to actually stop it.
Yeah, I mean, there are two ways of surveilling people. You can use those very sophisticated spywares, which cost a lot of money and are not that easy to buy if you're not a government. And those spywares will target potentially people who are vocal when it comes to criticizing their governments, people who are public figures. This is what Pegasus did. Pegasus was targeting human rights activists or lawyers. But when you're not doing those kinds of stuff, you're still leaving so much digital footprints everywhere now. I mean, whatever you're doing, you're leaving those footprints everywhere. Your phone, even without any spyware, your phone lead anybody to you. The data you leave everywhere, on every website, on whenever you upload an application, whenever you're using the cloud, whenever you're using AI solution. I mean, this is a huge amount of data that can say so much about you. So even if you're not a specific target at a specific time, they can be used against you afterwards. I mean, people can easily, if they have all those tools that help them monitor you on social media, that help, I mean, just the open source footprints you leave everywhere. You don't even need such a sophisticated spyware today to know where you are or what you're doing, because you share it yourself on social media. So most of the people see it as an advantage, as something great, as something that makes their life more comfortable, as a social media tool. But in the wrong hands, and if somebody wants to harm you, those data can be used against you. So I think we all have to be very aware of that whenever we leave information in the public domain, and there should be a growing awareness about that. What you leave, I mean, it's very difficult to go back to then and delete everything. You can try to use some application to lower your presence on the web and everywhere. But today, I mean, you cannot escape that kind of control. So be aware of it and try to share the minimum if you can, because you don't know what's going to happen tomorrow, and who will govern you as well tomorrow.
Or you can mislead it.
Yeah, you can also, but I mean, this requires a level of sophistication as well, and can be tiring.
Sure. And so you've led large, complex investigations before. So what made the Pegasus Project uniquely challenging in terms of editorial leadership?
So the Pegasus Project was very challenging in terms of security of communication, which I already explained. But it was also, I mean, it wasn't so much challenging because we really had so many stories that it wasn't a problem to work with different media around the world. Every media, every outlet we were partnering with had a very specific story that concerned them more specifically. The story in India was huge. The story in France was huge too, because of the nature of the people who had been targeted: ministers, president, and journalists. The story, of course, was also huge in Israel, and we were working with Haaretz on that story because it's an Israeli company. So we had to figure out how we would publish all our story to give them visibility. That meant that we decided to sequence the publish numbers of stories on day one, publish numbers there was some kind of management of that sequencing to do, because we couldn't let the Indians wait for the last day to get their story out. So we had to start in the way we were mixing our stories so that we would have the more impact. And we decided quite naturally, I think, to start with the stories about journalists, because those seemed very important, as we were Forbidden Stories, and our mission, and my mission at that time as editor-in-chief, was to pursue the work of assassinated journalists. So we really decided to focus on journalists on day one, and there were so much stories about journalists. This is how we published the Jamal Khashoggi story. And then we didn't, I think, mention the name of Emmanuel Macron until day 3 or 4. I don't remember. But yeah, there was a subtle sequencing to do, but it wasn't worse than in another cross-border publication. We had we had been so clear about the risks and the stakes of that investigation that everybody and all the partners in the investigation were, really understanding about the challenges, and actually, you know that what you have is a potential bomb, at least a scoop, so you protect it, and this was, I think, the mindset of every journalist in the group.
Yeah, and with over 80 journalists involved, this must have been a very, you spoke about it, the editorial process, how it was like, but how did you manage the storytelling and deciding which cases to feature and which not to feature and how to present them? So how did you go about that?
So the way a consortium like Forbidden Story work is that you have a central body, which is the team in Paris, the Forbidden Stories team, Laurent, me, and a dozen of journalists. And then you partner with outlets everywhere in the world. And the size and the stake of that story, we quickly ended up very, being a lot, because the Washington Post was adding more and more journalists, The Guardian as well. Everybody realizing that this was a big story needed to add more journalists in the story. And the way those consortiums work is that you really share the investigation, all the documents, all the elements, all the interviews, and then everyone decides to focus on that story or that story. We don't have to publish the exact same story. Every outlet is editorially independent. So we just agree that some of the themes or country will be published on specific days, but then on day one you can decide to focus on. Some had decided to put a big focus on Jamal Khashoggi. Some decided to write more on Hungarian journalists or on other stories. So it was quite an easy thing to do after all, because once you agree on the main themes and idea, there is no editorial control on our part more than that. And of course, everybody has to be right factually, but you make sure that this is the case before publication, because you share your articles in the group. They can be fact checked by other journalists, and when you work with such a big group of journalists, the risk that you publish something that is not correct is really, really limited, because you have so many fact checkers. Imagine, usually a journalist works with one fact checker, and this is not always the case. But in that case, when you're a journalist publishing something, you know that you're going to be read by 80 journalists, and the most prestigious journalist and the most talented one in their newsroom. So really, this minimized very much the risk of publishing anything false, and actually. This has been this has proven to be the case in Pegasus, where the stories had been so solid that it had this huge impact globally.
Were there any particular individuals or stories that you uncovered that stayed with you emotionally or ethically? And this not necessarily with the Pegasus Project, but in general, when you work with the Forbidden Stories?
So, of course, when you work with Forbidden Stories, your mission is to pursue the work of assassinated or on the thread journalists. So you're tackling with the very challenging story, humanly speaking, and people who are taking risks to make, just to tell what's happening and to document what's happening, and to hold powerful people accountable. I've been a journalist for more than 20 years. I have mostly worked in France, where I really don't take personal risks when I publish something, even if it's a big scoop, even if, the government doesn't like it. This is not the case in most of the country of the world. So I have this huge respect for the journalists who are taking risks to do what I'm doing in a much more comfortable, way, and in a country where I don't risk neither my freedom or my life or anything. So of course this is inspiring. This drives you as a journalist working for Forbidden Story, and this is meaningful. When journalists are killed for their story, it means it's often and almost all the time because they were working on very important stories, on environmental crimes, on drug trafficking, on corruption, on criminal groups, and those are stories that need to be told to the public, that need to be published. And I strongly believe in what Forbidden Story does, and I was so proud to be part of that organization for 5 years and to tell those important stories.
Indeed. And before we wrap up, so the investigation raised alarms about privacy, surveillance, and democracy itself. So if there is one thing you want listeners to take away from the Pegasus story, what would it be?
Is, first of all, don't trust your government when they say that they don't use cyber surveillance tool. Second, be very cautious with your device because sometimes you will, at some point, you might learn that you have been infected, but that's going to be too late. And if you do work on sensitive topic because you're a lawyer, because you're a journalist, because you are a human rights activist, you should be very, very careful. And the way to be careful is to go back to in-person meeting, to assume that what you will, the information you're going to send might be captured. So be careful with the identity of your sources and people you want to protect.
Definitely. And use more pen and paper.
Yeah. It's better. One. There's a business plan for that.
I think it's something I already said, but we leave, even if you're not targeted with a spyware as invasive as Pegasus, you have to keep in mind that you are working in a world where every move, every decision you make can be monitored through the online activity. You leave digital footprints everywhere now, and those footprints you leave can be easily used against you and weaponized against you. So we have to be aware of that today when we're sharing our stories on social media, when we're surfing on the internet, and everything leaves a footprint. So yeah, probably I think this is what I would keep from the Pegasus Project, but it doesn't really connect to the Pegasus Project. So I'm not sure. Yeah, not sure how you can use that.
Okay. Any closing remarks?
No.
All right. Any closing remarks?
No, thank you, Abdel. I think it's we really had a great conversation and covering most of the most important topics in that.
Indeed. Well, thank you so much for coming on the podcast and for your time and for writing this valuable book and leading this investigation.
Well, thank you so much for this interview. It was so interesting, and I really enjoyed spending an hour with you.
Likewise, thank you so much for coming on the podcast, and I look forward to having you on again in the future. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Abdallah.
I Thank you.